Greetings, everyone. Hopefully, everyone can see and hear us well. Um, Welcome to our fifth webinar on the Industry Future Challenge 2023 project. My name is Ravi Dindyal, your host for today and Chief Experience Officer at Prepr. As part of our mission at Prepr, we aim to educate and inspire Canadian innovation. Our sponsors, the National Research Council, Magnet, and Linux, have really entrusted us to deliver this very important program in order to be a catalyst of change and innovation in Canada. So let's get to it. Our topic today, unlocking Canada's mining economic potential. Really, we're just looking at a deep dive into the EV battery sector and its role in positioning Canada as a global leader in the battery minerals materials market. So how does this work? What is the challenge? So basically, there's 4 steps to it. Step 1 is what we're doing today, which is to have experts across the industry have a discussion, unpack some of the topics and challenges related to this sector. And then from that discussion, we would identify areas that we think would make great challenge statements. And these challenge statements then become projects, sort of business cases that we then put out for our audience to solve, and we call these challenges. And in solving them, we have prizes up to $500 Visa gift card, things like that. And then they submit their submissions, their challenge solutions. We then review them and judge them. And step 4, we pick the winners and award prizes. So pretty straightforward. So why this topic? We know that the future of mining, alternatives to fossil-based fuels and energy, right? The future of mining is not coal and oil. The electric car revolution was accelerated and disrupted by companies like Tesla, causing a high demand for minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel. We also know that Canada is in the top 5 countries probably that have these natural resources. The Canadian government have also made massive new investments in EV battery plants in Quebec, Windsor, and St. Thomas, Ontario, subsidizing companies like Ford, LG, and Volkswagen. There has also been a recent article in the Globe and Mail explaining that, that there's been a massive acquisition of Canadian companies like Alcan, Falconbridge, and Noranda. And these have all been swallowed up by foreign behemoths, mostly based in Australia, which seems to signal that the Canadian government is funding foreign-based company growth versus supporting Canadian-owned mining companies. Therefore, we wanted to get a better understanding of the real economic potential of Canada's resources and the challenges that we face to realize this potential. So we've gathered this expert panel. So let's kick things off with some quick intros of our panel. And maybe we'll start with you, Kunal.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Kunal Falfer. Currently, I'm an advisor to Li-Cycle and looking at other opportunities as a sort of career transition and time with the family as well. Prior to that, I was actually an executive at Li-Cycle, the lithium battery recycling company, for several years. As a 4th employee and helped scale that to a public company and beyond. And then I spent a short time in the lithium metal space with a company called Li Metal for about a year as the president. Previously, I spent some time in Germany and worked in the solar industry, so have been aligned with this clean tech space for a majority of my career now over the last 15 years. And excited to have this discussion with the team here.
Thanks, Kunal. Sounds great. Over to you, Satish.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm Satish Stephenson. I'm a mining engineer based in Vancouver, BC. I have about 7 years of experience doing technical mine planning work, as well as process engineering, but I've also done a lot in the engineering consultant space, doing EPCM type work and some financial models and some also technical stuff on that side. I currently work for a small boutique consultant called Fuse Advisors, and we mainly do project management and due diligence type work, overseeing the mergers and acquisitions space a bit as well. And currently I'm on a secondment with a mining company called Western Copper in a director role as doing some of their project development work for their casino project in the Yukon. So happy to be here today.
Well, Satish. Last but not least, Danny, how are you?
Hi, everyone. This is Danny Huff from Neo Battery Materials. What we are doing currently at Neo Battery Materials, we're actually Canada's first developer of silicon anode materials, and I've been actually in this space for about 3 to 4 years now. My background is in finance as well as investment banking, and I'm really happy to have this conversation with Kunal and Satish, and I hope everybody enjoys the conversation today. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Just a quick note to our audience before we get into the questions. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat and we'll attempt to answer depending on time. Okay, so let's jump into it. The first thing I think is just to kind of set the scene and context and to understand Canada's resource potential in this area. So I don't know, maybe this is a question for Satish being the mining engineer of the group. So on a scale of 1 to 10, like how does Canada compare to other countries for rare earth mineral deposits?
Probably rating it out of 10 is a difficult thing to do, but I guess I'll give it a 6 as an arbitrary number here. We definitely have, in Canada, we definitely have some diversity, like quite a bit of diversity in our metal space. And in rare earths, we do have some, but not as many as, some other countries in the world. We don't have literally everything we need, but we do have enough to make us, I guess, a global threat in that sense. But what we're missing, which would, put us further up the ladder, is manufacturing, and that's something we're heavily missing in Canada.
Okay, sounds good. Kunal, Danny, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think relevant from the battery ecosystem or even rare earths. I mean, I was on a panel the other day with a lot of folks from the US and basically they're saying, Canada has a lot of the resources that can be tapped into for, say, the battery supply chain, which the US does not have. And one gap they're also talking about, or we were talking about, is the refining step in between. A lot of materials, even if they're mined here or Australia, they end up going back and forth across the world to get into a usable form. And so that's one area on the primary side. And then, of course, my experience has been on the secondary side, and recycling can always bring another source of domestic supply, which, at least in the battery space is ramping up and hopefully soon in the rare earth side as well.
Sounds good. So this, you mentioned manufacturing. Maybe you could just explain that a bit more to the audience, what the challenges with manufacturing are and how that process works.
Sure. I mean, I guess the most basic way to explain it is the fact that Canada has lots of really good resources to tap into, as Kunal mentioned. And, that's a big positive for us. But what Kunal was saying is that we sell a lot of those products from our mines to other countries where they would actually manufacture those into some finished product, whether that be a battery, a car, a computer, what have you. And Canada ends up buying back that finished product at a higher price than we actually sold our raw materials to that country in the first place. So it kind of creates a little bit of a conundrum economically.
Okay, yeah, that's a challenge for sure. I wasn't aware of that. And then just getting back to the question about the potential for our natural resources. What are the types of minerals that Canada has that are relevant to the energy industry or the rare earth mineral industry? I know there's like lithium and cobalt, and nickel. I think those things. Just trying to maybe unpack that a bit more.
We definitely have, cobalt, nickel, and lithium are definitely huge, especially in the battery space. And I'm sure the other two guys on this call know a lot more about that than I do, actually. But BC or a lot of the projects I worked on here in BC are gold copper projects, and copper is predominantly used for wiring of most electronics, and gold is used in electronics a lot as well for circuit boards and for most computers, motherboards, stuff like that. And so Canada is very rich in a lot of those materials, which I talk about BC because that's where a lot of my experience is. But even just when you talk about energy relevant things, we have coal, we have anthracite coal, which is actually used for smelting. Anthracite is the highest grade of coal, and Canada predominantly has anthracite coal, not the type of coal that you use to burn and heat your home like the US does. In terms of combating an energy crisis, well, having the oil sands and having easy access to oil is a huge plus for us. But I know that kind of goes away from your question about metals, but I think it's part of a greater issue as well.
Yeah, we seem to have the full package. Danny, your thoughts on the types of materials that you guys are required to do the manufacturing in your business?
Yeah, so we primarily use silicon metal that is actually comes mostly from China at this current moment, because China, as everyone knows, is the biggest processor of almost any kind of energy critical materials at this current moment. But one of the biggest advantage in Canada is that obviously there's not too many countries in the Western Hemisphere, but Canada is the only one country that actually contains all of the critical EV minerals like lithium, cobalt, nickel, manganese, and the list goes on, and even phosphorus at this current moment, as there's about 2 development projects that we know of that is currently going on within Quebec. And we know that there's a lot of silica sand that also has to be processed into silicon metal, in which we can use. But we see that there's a plethora of opportunities to be within Canada. And I believe that this is the main reason why Bloomberg NEF, one of the top firms in terms of energy storage market research, has ranked Canada second in terms of global supply chain for EV batteries. So I think Canada is a highly big opportunity, but obviously, as Kunal said, we need to really up our game in terms of the processing. And as she said, we're sending in very cheap raw materials over to China, and we're buying them for much greater prices. So if we can integrate and actually build a really robust supply chain in terms of mineral processing, as well as battery manufacturing and materials manufacturing, I believe that Canada will be one of the largest battery manufacturing countries in the very short term as well.
Yeah, so just maybe pause on the processing topic. What is I guess I'm assuming that's a large investment to set up processing infrastructure. Is that the biggest barrier?
I mean, I can speak to just the actual mineral processing on mine sites. So what often happens is after we mine it, take our shovels and dig it out of the ground, blast it, dig it out of the ground. It goes to a process facility, and mining projects can be in the range of billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. And the process plant is usually at least 60% of that cost. So some process facilities, and I guarantee this is probably similar for, Li-Cycle and for, other battery plants like that, like process plants are in the billion-dollar price tag, if not more, for all the equipment that's in there. But also just from an operating cost perspective, the energy required for crushing and grinding, what we call comminution in the mining industry, the energy costs are on par with a small town, or not even a small town sometimes a fairly large town, like a city. So with all that in mind, you end up with costs that are insanely high, and that's kind of a barrier to entry is capital costs, especially right now with inflation.
Yeah. So we know that Canada's made investments, like I mentioned at the top, with the Volkswagen plant for battery manufacturing. Are we doing similar or exploring, is the Canadian government exploring similar types of investments in processing facilities that you guys are aware of?
I mean, there's been the whole infrastructure or cluster in Bécancour in Quebec, obviously very Quebec focused, has a little bit of every part of the supply chain. So you have cathode active material, maybe not refining. There's Nouveau Monde Graphite, which is doing some processing. You have Umicore coming to near Kingston. There's just an announcement some funding there. So it's maybe not the refining of raw material to usable material, but then it's using the usable material in a more chemical process before the battery cell. There was some discussion in Manitoba about some lithium refining as well, but there's probably a gap there still in terms of building out that. And I think what Satish is saying is it's very complicated, or it's maybe more expensive than even a battery factory.
Yeah, wow. So just from a layman's perspective, so what I'm hearing is that we have the raw resources. We then ship those to China or other countries to get refined or sort of processed into usable, inputs into manufacturing batteries. Is that correct? So if we could sort of create that supply chain, just control all of that locally, that would really make the companies that Danny run, for example, a lot more competitive globally?
I think so personally. If Canada just had more manufacturing facilities, or at least greater throughput manufacturing facilities, we could be much more of a global competitor than we already are, I think.
Yeah. Danny, just your thoughts on that, like the profitability of locally made refined materials versus importing from other places?
Yeah. So, in my opinion, I think it would be great to have local production of battery materials processing, mineral processing. But I believe that in order to be competitive with the global sphere at this current moment, because we get inputs from China as well as other countries like Vietnam in terms of rare earth minerals as well. But I think the biggest gap for Canada at this current moment, cost is one factor, but I think technology is the biggest factor, because right now, in terms of the technology of processing, even for battery materials, graphite, even cathode manufacturing, it's the companies that are established within the Asia Pacific regions that are coming into Canada, not Canada itself, developing the technology itself. So I believe that if the cost can be covered, that's very good. But I think the technology within Canada, it has to also grow to be better, efficient, as well as cheaper, that can be competitive on the global scale as well. So I believe that this is sort of like a two-tier problem that Canada has to tackle at this moment.
Yeah. Kunal, any final thoughts on this?
No, I think what Danny was saying is correct, right? It was touched upon earlier. Companies coming when all the supply chain are coming, like Umicore's of the world from Europe or Asia, POSCO from Korea, or the cell manufacturing, they've already developed the technology. So the question is, how do you look at the next supply chain where you can develop technology? Like the previous company I was working at, Lime Metal, was trying to develop the next generation anode, and can you help scale those? I've had the same discussion with Enercan and the like. Can you help scale those companies? Or Nano One, I think based in Vancouver, is looking at new processes, new technologies. Can those be the sort of champions to build out actual manufacturing of Canadian technology?
Yeah. Just maybe changing lanes here a bit. Speaking about Canadian companies, we were talking about the sort of acquisition of sort of massive Canadian companies, and it seems like now the Canadian government that's funding the mining industry is really subsidizing foreign companies. Maybe you guys can comment a bit on that sort of phenomenon that's happening. The Canadian companies are getting sort of acquired mostly by these national or Australian-based or Chinese-based companies. Is there any sort of newcomers, or what do you guys think of that the landscape and what needs to happen in the future?
I know from the companies I've worked for, and I've worked with a lot of juniors in my career so far, and from the perspective of junior mining companies that are a lot of them are Canadian, they might have a single asset, a single piece of land, some deposit that they explored, they did some geology on, and they found, let's say, gold or whatever. But those juniors often don't actually have the money to finance and develop that project themselves. And so when they're actually doing that exploration work, they're not actually doing it with the job of mining and extracting it as a Canadian company. They're doing that job to get it to look saleable. So they're doing that job to make it look like they have a big resource that looks attractive to someone, that's something that's, easy to mine. It's not going to have lots of socioeconomic issues, stuff like that. They're doing everything they can, but they're not actually doing it in order to mine it themselves. And so what ends up happening is you end up with these giants like Rio Tinto from Australia or BHP that's based in London. And you have these foreign companies that come in, and then when the project is good enough to basically push the go button, it's those bigger companies that end up pushing that go button by buying out either the smaller company or at least that asset from them first. When I'm working with Western right now, that's actually something we're in the midst of navigating too. So that's very personal to me, actually. But it's whether you consider that a problem or not a problem is a different topic. But yeah, that is basically what happens on a very regular basis. And there's only a few companies in Canada, not even a few. There's really two companies in Canada, Barrick Gold and Teck Resources, that are even close to the scale of those other bigger companies. I wouldn't even say they're big fish, but they're bigger fish in the global market. So it's rare that you're getting bought out by a Canadian company is more the takeaway.
Yeah. So they're looking for a big exit, basically. Do something and have a big ROI on your investment. Danny, any comments on that? Any thoughts?
I'm good for myself.
Yeah. So maybe just again from a novice perspective, I see Australia as being a very similar sort of geography, having similar resources as us, similar population, similar economy. Why have they been so successful versus why is Canada not in this position where we're acquiring Australian companies? Why is it the other way around? I don't know. Kunal, you have any thoughts on that?
Maybe I haven't been in mining for a long time, but I guess from a economy point of view, mining is big here, but there's a lot of other industry, oil and gas and other energy resources. Whereas I think in Australia, that is a core of their economy, and maybe it's been supported more for a longer term. Satish might know better, but that's just my guess.
Yeah.
No, I fully agree with that. I don't know exactly. I can't speak to specifics, but I do know that their government historically has put more of an effort towards growing and developing their mining industry on a purely like geological basis as well. The way Australia's deposits are laid out, if you find a certain geology, let's say you find a nickel ore over in this area, it's pretty easy to find nickel ore in the next place that you'd expect it to be based on the geography of it. So let's say you see, a syncline or anticline. Those are basically like hills and troughs in the geology. It's pretty easy to find the ore resurfacing that you're looking for at the next peak of that syncline or anticline. Whereas in Canada, you had the glaciers come in, and when you had that kind of, this is speaking, in geologic time, but when you had that come in, it kind of shifted things over in very mass proportions. So the deposits you might be looking for might not really be in the places you're looking for them, which makes them harder to develop overall.
Yeah.
And just to add on to the sort of the finance side of things, I think right now we know that the market is in a severe downturn, but there's still a lot of liquidity within Australia that's being invested into these mining companies, and that has been historically true, even if markets have been good. So at this current moment, because right now funds have dried up a lot within Canada, and especially in this financial markets, in which fund redemptions are almost at all-time highs on the buy side with hedge funds as well as family offices. So just just in terms of the pure economic and investment perspective, there's just not a lot of money flowing through to mining companies, and especially since the super cycle has ended, that was probably 10 years ago, but it sort of, the landscape has dried up in terms of the finance side. So right now, in order to stimulate Canada's sort of mining economy, as well as junior issuers, even the major issuers here, I think the government really has to step up. I know that the Canadian federal government, they're coming in with EV infrastructure deals, especially with critical minerals, but that's just not cutting it enough. So unless there's a lot of support from the government on the federal, provincial, even the municipal level, I think we're going to be lacking behind Australia at this current moment.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective. I think mining companies in Canada should probably add AI to their names and probably attract more investment that way.
But that said, I guess just to add to that, I mean, Australia doesn't really have much, much auto manufacturing, if any. The other parts of the supply chain, like cell manufacturing and CAM manufacturing, haven't really gone there. So, maybe they're doing better than us in mining, but the rest of the supply chain, if we look at the EV ecosystem, is not there and probably won't be there either.
Yeah. We talked about deposits. I think that you mentioned in glaciers and, the way that the Canadian landscape's set up. Moving to the Ring of Fire, which I think is in Ontario, correct? Yeah. And, there's apparently billions of dollars of potential there for those resources. I'm just curious, though, I mean, to educate the people listening, why has that been so controversial to mine? Is it similar to the oil sands? Or is it just heavy investment?
I mean, the Ring of Fire specifically, I believe Ring of Fire metals is not to seem like I'm speaking poorly of them, but they're not a company that has a super, super long operating history. They're not a company with a ton of financial backing, which is something we've already talked about today. And so their deposit, they're talking about this huge deposit. Like, I think they talked about it being one of the biggest deposits for nickel and some other, I can't remember exactly what was in their deposit, but they talked about it being this huge deposit. And as a smaller mining company, like I talked about before, you're not actually trying to develop that yourself. You're trying to develop it enough that a major will buy it from you. And so I think that's a prime example of that happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we also have a lot more sort of regulations around clean tech and rules, versus like countries like, probably China and Africa that have less regulations around mining and how it's done and how it's evacuated.
Yeah, actually, so every year Ernst & Young puts out, it's like a top 10 list of the biggest risks to the mining industry. And they just put out theirs about 8 days ago. And ESG is actually now listed as the biggest threat to the mining industry, or biggest risk, excuse me. So it's good that you bring that up, because environmental regulation in Canada is a lot more strict. Labor laws are a lot more strict, things like that. My friends and I actually always talk about how easy it would be or how it's kind of a dream of ours to develop a mine in Africa, because it would just be so much easier to do so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good and bad, right? I think it's good for humanity, probably bad for the economy, but overall good for the environment. I know, Kunal, you're sort of the clean tech guy. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people throw the word ESG around a lot. You see it in articles, etc. I mean, I think Satish, you mentioned social issues like labor and all. It's all it's not just environmental, but I know that there was give me an example. It's not the be all end all rating. I think a tobacco company had a higher ESG rating than Tesla. So there were some definitely tweets or whatever they call them now, with it being X. So it's not a perfect metric, but I think it guides people in the right space. And I think the comment on Africa is that those metals go into a supply chain to build cars in Germany, et cetera. And so the buyers are demanding better control, et cetera. So I think everyone wants to get up to the same or similar standards that apply to the country. I think it's important as part of this transition.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, shifting gears here a bit. Let's get to batteries. So again, as a consumer, there's big innovation in drones, as we've seen, and scooters flying around your neighborhood on sidewalks, things like that. And for me, it's sort of like, well, what's changed? Why is there now the scooter that can go really fast, really far? And I'm assuming that's because of battery innovation. I don't know, maybe Danny, you're the guy to comment on this. Just give us, your sort of take on the last 10 years of battery innovation and where we are today and how it's affecting, motorized vehicles.
Yeah. So actually, we all carry around our phones with lithium-ion batteries, and it's probably in all kind of electronics applications. But the battery industry actually isn't too old per se compared to other industries. And actually the first lithium-ion battery, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was actually produced by Sony somewhere around the 1990s. And the lithium-ion battery costs in terms of kilowatt hours have significantly decreased over the past 10 years. And this is because of significant investments into battery technologies, but also the growth of the electric vehicle market. And probably the biggest part that contributed to this is the maturity of the cathode materials in terms of having much more higher nickel content within the cathode materials. And right now we see the trend in which LFP, which is lithium iron phosphate, currently almost 99% is produced in China. But right now, because LFP batteries are much more cheaper than NCM, nickel cobalt manganese batteries. This is why the market, actually 60% has been taken by LFP batteries in China, and we are looking at the trend in which LFP will take over NCM in the very near future as well. So there's innovations within the cathode side, but also within the anode side, which is the other big battery material that has been a hot attention of focus these days. Right now, we know that graphite is the only available material that can be used as the anode material, whether be it natural or synthetic. But right now, really, in order to increase the battery capacity, we really need to implement silicon anodes as soon as possible. So right now within the industry, especially in the Asia Pacific region, China, South Korea, Japan, they are looking to integrate silicon anodes as soon as possible. So we actually never hear about silicon anodes here in North America because we're actually just getting into the EV space. But in those Asia Pacific regions, silicon anodes are being discussed almost every other day in the press, as well as in these battery technology conferences. So right now, in order to go to the next step in terms of reaching that 1,000-mile EV battery, we will need silicon anodes, and also in the next step, we will also need the lithium metal anodes as well. So that is the current direction that the industry is taking, and this will allow us to have batteries that run significantly longer and is competitive with internal combustion engine vehicles, and they will have ultra-fast charging that might be even comparable with just fueling gasoline-powered cars today. So that's just a very high-level, sort of messy overview, but I wish Satish and Kunal can sort of add on to that.
Yeah, I think, Danny, you covered a lot there. Obviously, the innovation is probably hitting a limit on the cathode side, and the anode side innovation, whether it's silicon or lithium metal, would push towards smaller batteries or longer ranges, basically, simply put, and that'll help push EVs into the more mass market segments. But the cost curve in the last 5 to 7 years has been unbelievable, and now everything is basically, you go to Home Depot, any device is lithium ion powered. Obviously, being on the recycling end, we would receive all these end-of-life batteries, and you just see tons of different products. People don't even realize. Once at a conference when I was living in my condo by myself, I said I have 7 lithium-ion batteries at home, just powering my laptop, etc. Now living in a house, I have way more because of lawnmower and whatever. And some guy stood up that in a family of 4, he had 140 batteries. He had done the same exercise. If I did it now with a wife and daughter and all the household stuff and 2 electric cars, probably also have 40, 50 lithium ion batteries at home.
Wow. And just again, out of curiosity, I think we all kind of think of batteries as far as range, like how far can my electric car go, right? Again, that's kind of the consumer measurement. I think that's most common. I think I read somewhere now that I think it was a company in China that developed a battery that has like over a 600 or 700 mile per hour, mile range per charge. Danny, you know if you can comment on that.
I think what you're referring to is CATL's new LFP technology. CATL being the biggest global battery manufacturer. And sort of just to clarify or elaborate on LFP technologies, the reason why the market today, almost all the electric vehicles in North America, South Korea, as well as Japan, they all use NMC batteries. So the nickel, manganese, cobalt kind, because they have high energy densities, which can give longer ranges. But right now, in terms of NMC, the safety is much more lower than the LFP batteries, and the LFP batteries are actually much more cheaper to integrate. So this is why the industry wants to implement more of LFP cathodes into the batteries instead of NMCs at this current market. But the major deficiency with the LFP is it's cheap, but the energy density is much more lower, which means that it gives a much more shorter driving range. So right now, CATL has innovated. They have proposed that they have made this a very long-range LFP battery, but really, if we take the market insights, they must be including some kind of silicon anode or high energy density anode, because if the LFP cathode density is lower, we actually need a much more higher energy density anode material to sort of compensate for the deficiencies of the cathode energy density being lower, which means that if we have a higher energy density anode, more cathode materials can be put into the batteries. And so that sort of is in line with the weight of each EV. So I believe that is what you're currently referring to, Ravi, a longer running LFP battery. That's right.
Maybe just to comment on Ravi, the question around range though is that the people who don't drive EVs overestimate how much range they need. And nobody has a gas pump at home.
You're not driving a Montreal every day.
Yeah, you can fill up your car to 450, 500, 550 kilometers range every day if you want. I mean, when I was commuting more regularly, 100 kilometers a day, I wouldn't even charge it every day because you don't need to. But obviously people always think about those one-off trips. Oh, once a year I drive to Montreal. How am I going to do that? Well, I drove to Tremblant in mine and there's no problem. That was back when only Tesla could use Tesla chargers. Now half the OEMs have signed up to use the Tesla charger. So there's a great network available, across Canada and the US. So, is there really a need for 800,000-900,000 kilometer range? Probably not. You're just increasing the cost of the vehicle or because you're using more battery. There's some people who believe probably 500 plus or minus is probably the right range. People who are daily commuting in the GTA, driving to the GO station, you can probably get by with a 400 kilometer or 300 kilometer range. So,
because you're charging it every day.
Yeah, you can if you want. If you have there's other issues like, if you when we lived in a condo, it's hard to they make it increasingly difficult to install a charger there. But if you live in a house out in the suburbs, I mean, it's not really that hard to install a charger and it's not that expensive.
Yeah. And the infrastructure is coming, I guess, is slowly being built out for charging.
I will say from an industrial perspective, I've worked with a couple of mines that are implementing electric haul trucks, and a battery with a longer life would definitely be appreciated, because you're typically doing, like, a shift is usually a 12-hour shift on most sites, and sometimes you're switching out batteries as much as every 5-6 hours. So, I mean, these are 40-ton load haul trucks. Like, they're much bigger than your average pickup truck. So I'm not speaking to the average consumer here by any means, but I mean, if the technology were to go a step further, I'm sure it'd be appreciated by at least some people out there.
Yeah, I think speaking, you guys are kind of talking about the different applications for batteries. Danny, maybe just curious, with Neo, like, is your clientele drones, industrial vehicles? Like, give us a sense of like your sort of your client roster.
Yeah, so we're actually mainly focused towards supplying to battery cell manufacturers as well as EV car makers, because that's just the higher growth segment that we realize for the battery demand at this current moment. So right now, currently, we have established over about 60 relationships, and that includes global battery cell manufacturers as well as EV car makers. But our silicon anodes, they just don't go into just electric vehicles, but they can also be put into electronics, energy storage, as well as aviation batteries. So we are testing our materials into various different kinds of electronic applications at this moment.
That sounds great. And Kunal, I wanted to spend some time on the recycling factor you're talking about, because I think it's really important. Can you give us just an overview of how this works? And, because I don't even really know where to put my batteries when they're out. Do I throw them in the recycling or I put them in the garbage? It's always a big, conundrum.
Well, the answer is neither, right? Actually, we moved to Mississauga last year, and they actually, around this time, like this week with the garbage pickup, you just put a bag of batteries on your green bin and they take them with you. That's all types of batteries, though, alkaline, whatever. But I've definitely, maybe I didn't notice it before I was in recycling, but I definitely noticed an increase when you go to a lot of big box stores, Staples, Home Depot, etc. They all have bins near the exit. Even actually the Metro near my house has a bin where you can drop off batteries. So for consumer batteries, it's actually very important you put them in those channels, because when they get into a garbage dump, particularly lithium ion, alkaline, not so much of a concern in terms of fires, but lithium-ion batteries have the ability to catch fire easily. So in a garbage dump or recycling, traditional recycling, they're going to do that. So it's better to find your local store. There's a group called Call to Recycle that is a resource. You can look at their website to see, where is a bin or something close by. Then with industrial batteries, it's more complicated. That's generally it's more B2B business. They're working with groups like Li-Cycle or any of the other lithium recyclers out there and establishing partnerships. The thing is, the recycling rate tends to be low, right? It's easier. I have 2 phones sitting right there on the shelf from previous generation. In case the new one conks out, you want to go back to the old phone. But you can't do that with, you don't just leave your busted car in the garage and buy a new one just in case. But most of the OEMs are taking an active role in that, all driven by the critical materials. They want those materials to come back into their supply chain. There's very long warranties right now on vehicle batteries because people want to prove out the technology. So, for larger ticket items like that, there is a pathway also to recycle.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important topic, and maybe one of the challenges that comes out of this discussion. So just to understand, the sort of the cycle here. So if we throw our, lithium-ion batteries or alkaline batteries into a sort of at a Home Depot, that's picked up by the recycling company. Is it taken to a recycling plant?
Well, that would be like a mixed bag box, like Call to Recycle, for example, would work with a sorter, because you want to take the alkaline batteries, your little button batteries, your lithium ion batteries, they all have different processors. So for example, Call to Recycle takes that, uses a company to sort them, and then uses different processors who specialize in processing those individual types of batteries.
Yeah. So do you guys then, is your company structured around making new batteries from that material?
So yeah, life cycle, for example, which I'm not a part of anymore. They're focused on making the raw material. So they'll go down to what's like a cobalt sulfate, nickel sulfate, which would sell to the cathode producers. Some of their competitors, like Redwood in the US or Ascend, are trying to make the cathode material themselves, and then their customer would be the cell manufacturer. Nobody's really going all the way through. There's rumors, people like Tesla are going to recycle, or I think Volkswagen, they started a subsidiary PowerCo that probably looks at. They have a pilot plant. I think they announced. So everyone's trying to. Some may try to do it on their own or partner more closely or other business models as well. But the recyclers themselves, I don't know of anyone that is going into cell manufacturing. In Asia, this has been around longer. For example, CATL, the company Danny mentioned, owns a major part of a recycler as well.
So it is possible then to open up these batteries, sort of retake the material and process it again to make it brand new in a way? So
yeah, you're basically going down to the raw material and then putting it back into the battery production cycle.
Okay, well, I wasn't aware of that. I thought once it was done, that's it. I guess you could sort of repurpose it. But yeah, that's really interesting to know. Sort of last question before I get to the actual questions in the channel here. Going back to mining and coming back to skills training in Canada, maybe I'll start with you, Danny. As far as talent and the types of skills that we need to produce, what you guys are doing with batteries, what are the gaps that you're seeing from a human capital perspective?
It's quite coincidental because this is one of the points that I actually thought of, Ravi. But in baseball, we sort of call it a farming system in which there's scouts that scout very talented people all across the globe. But I think the battery system in Canada also needs this kind of farming system because in terms of the human capital, we actually lack that aspect very much at this moment because currently in the Asia Pacific regions, universities and institutions, they've actually implemented systems where they actually have masters in battery engineering, and they actually have a guaranteed job at the big battery cell manufacturers. And this is how top talents are going right from universities to those battery cell manufacturers. But in Canada, we also need an ecosystem in which the universities partner up with companies and the companies partner up with governmental institutions so that we can have a farming system in which we take some kind of battery technology as well as intellect from these countries, and we sort of grow organically from there. So without this farming system and this human capital aspect in terms of intellectual property as well as technology, I think this is probably the biggest missing part for Canada to become one of the top battery manufacturing countries at this moment.
Interesting. Satish, from your end, from the actual mining skill set, what are your thoughts on the gaps?
Well, I mean, beyond anything else, there's just an insane shortage of mining engineers and just mining professionals in general, whether it's even in engineering or, people who have technical degrees, like college trades, things like that. Mining just isn't marketed as cool for some reason. A lot of people are very environmentally conscious and they realize that, they say mining's bad for the environment, but I think the real takeaway is that it's not bad for the environment or good for it. It's required for humanity. And so I think, as a mining engineer myself, I was talking to some friends about this the other day, and we were talking about, what if markets were on a much heavier downturn and, it was harder for people to find jobs. And we were talking about it, and we came to the realization that even if that happened, we would just end up doing okay rather than excellent, because there's so few people in the mining industry right now compared to what's actually required. I know this is a statistic, I believe, from 2018 or 2019, and we talked about Australia being a major player. They pumped out, I think, 32 mining engineering graduates that year, and I think their industry requirement was 108. So really lacking, not just in Canada, but other countries as well. And I think that's true for Canada too. I don't have the exact statistic on it, but even for myself, when I started my degree at UBC, or got into the mining department, at least, there's 56 kids. When I graduated, there was 32 in my class. And when I was graduating, the incoming classes were like 17, 19, like they were really dwindling for numbers. So
Yeah.
I see those people entering the industry. There's a lot of people who left the industry during economic downturns and didn't come back. And then on top of that, there's even fewer people graduating and entering in this field. So honestly, just getting people involved and, wanting to go to site and blow up big rocks with, it's a lot of fun. It's a good industry to be in. So I encourage, anyone watching here today who's considered or ever considered mining to get into it for sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Satish. Kunal?
Yeah, I was just saying, I don't think it's sold well from the university level. I mean, I went to U of T, graduating class per year is like 1,500 students. I think there's 8 or 10 my year in mining, and nobody really talked about anything except for that the mining building was the oldest building. So it's even just the aura around the building being so old kind of made that discipline seem like this is an archaic thing, and maybe they need to push it further, since there are a lot of global mining companies, TSX or juniors, TSX listed, and there's quite a bit of opportunity, as Satish was saying. Here, I think the drawback is people maybe not as open to going to remote locations and things like that. And having lived abroad and see how people interact in the US, I think in Canada we're a little bit conservative around moving around for work.
Yeah. Well, maybe go into asteroids, but make it a bit more attractive, mining asteroids. But I think after today's discussion, definitely I think a lot more people will consider it. A few minutes left here, guys. So I'm going to just get to some of the questions. So this is a question from Mohammed. What are the challenges of mining in Canada compared to other countries that are leading in mining? For instance, I know in Northern Ontario mining, they dig down 2 to 3 kilometers to find the resources. Can you please reflect on this? So it's an open question. Who wants to take that one?
I mean, that sounds like it's more up my alley, but kind of what we talked about earlier. I mean, Canada has a lot of restrictions on ESG. And so, our government puts a lot more in the way of environmental constraints that we have to follow. We have a minimum wage that's a lot higher than most other countries in the world. Whether you think our minimum wage is high enough or not is a different story, but environmentally, socially, etc., we're a company that is technically, we are difficult to operate in. I mean, speaking about deposits specifically, 2 to 3 kilometers is standard. I mean, that's not, that varies a lot depending on what type of deposit you're looking for, the geology of the area. And we can't go, in this short time frame, we can't go through every country in the world and compare them to Canada's deposits. But even within Canada, you have lots of variety in terms of open pits versus underground mines. So open pits, you might only have 20, 30 meters of overburden. And then after that, you get right into digging your open pit, which is basically just a big hole of gold or copper or what have you. BC, Ontario, like both have a variety of each. When you're saying 2 to 3 kilometers, that's typically underground, but we have a lot of underground in Quebec as well. I don't know. There's a lot more to that I can't exactly get into, but in terms of those challenges, I would say it is a lot of those, shortage of labor, environmental regulations, social governance, inflation and capital costs. It's those things that are really holding us back the most here.
Yeah. I don't know, Kunal, Dan, you guys jump in as you need. I'll get to one last question here. I think we answered this, but just to ask it, this is from Gagandeep. Countries in Africa have huge deposits of metals. Can we leverage these metals and make batteries over here? What's the status of Canada in manufacturing these or technology that is here? I think we talked a bit about this at the top, but maybe just to be specific, if you guys want to respond to that.
I mean, in terms of which metals, it's also very open-ended. It depends on the country as well, because Africa is a big place and a lot of them have different social issues going on. I can't speak for exactly which metals would be required for battery manufacturing or which are most prominent for Danny and for you, Kunal. But as a takeaway, I don't see why you couldn't leverage that at all. I think you would just have to really be the right opportunity, and it would be very niche and specific to that opportunity, is what I would say.
I guess just add to that, so it's already happening, right? 60% plus of the cobalt comes from Congo. If you made a cobalt-based battery, chances are some of it came from Africa, except from Congo, it goes to China to refine, and then out to wherever the battery manufacturing is. There's just not, again, it goes back to that refining capacity. Electra Battery Materials is trying to set up that refining in Northern Ontario, but it takes time and money to do that. So it's not what he's proposing or questioning is happening. It's just it's a long chain.
Yeah. I recommend people look up mining in Congo. It's not a good situation there. It's very very unethical type of practices that's happening in Congo. So there's some interesting material on YouTube. If you look that up, you can find it. Guys, just to kind of land the plane here a bit, coming back to challenges, I think for me, I see maybe, a challenge around upskilling the workforce within the mining industry, the battery industry, as being something that, would be a good sort of problem statement here. Another one I think is in the recycling area, making battery recycling more efficient, it sounds like. But I'll open it to you guys if you had to sort of create a problem statement that you'd like solved. I don't know if you guys have any suggestions based on the discussion or your own thoughts.
My biggest takeaway from our discussion today, or at least from my perspective on it, is just getting people involved, getting people who actually want to be in mining and marketing it better. So if anyone out there knows a way to market it to not just a greater population, but make mining look a little bit more sexy, I guess, I'd love to hear it, because, I've obviously really enjoyed my career in it so far. And, doing things like this are a way to share that with other people, share my enthusiasm for the industry and what I've done. But, I'd love to have, more personal chats with people and really be able to talk about the industry and how great it's been, not just for me, but how great it can be for other people in their futures too. So.
Maybe to piggyback off that, Satish, it's not just mining. It's even, talking about cell manufacturing. We talked about foreign companies coming here and not a lot of domestic companies. But, you can go to Korea and there's thousands of electrochemists, PhDs who can do R&D for LG and Samsung on their cells. We don't have that base of knowledge here. So it's also, trying to get the education sector to focus on this new economy and bringing in a pipeline of people that can help innovate.
Amazing. Danny, last comment to you.
Yeah, I think Kunal and Satish actually cover my points, but sort of in another line, in another perspective, I think how can we really incentivize companies and the government to actually collaborate together? Because I believe, and also our company believes, that collaboration is the best way to move forward in terms of the battery manufacturing as well as the materials ecosystem here in Canada. So how can we incentivize companies to work together? I think that is the biggest question that I currently have, and I think maybe a very maybe a very high level question in which can't be solved in the next probably month or a year, but I think that's something that we highly sort of think about in our company at this moment.
Yeah. Well, guys, we're at time. Really educational, insightful conversation. Very grateful to have you guys participate. I think, we started the wave, hopefully. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing, is to spark innovation in Canada. So again, thank you so much. I'd like to thank our audience. Appreciate you joining us today. And thank Jenny Law and Sana Ali, our production and marketing team, for helping pulling this together. So once again, everyone, thank you, and talk to everyone soon. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.